fiscal notes this session and how that process works, just as more of an educational matter than anything else.
Ready? Okay, can everybody hear me? All right. Good morning, board members. Nestor Rodriguez, economist here to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing all session. This is not just me, but a couple of members of my audience. Sam, Dale, and Elise is here too. Yeah. So what we've been doing with fiscal notes. Just to start with, what is a fiscal note? It's a written estimate of direct and measurable impacts that may result from implementing legislation. It helps legislators better understand how a legislative bill may affect the state budget, USBE, or an individual program. And we try to identify direct and measurable savings, may include specific USB program cost savings, revenue gains, or revenue losses. Some of the fiscal notes that we've gone through include, we just got another school safety bill. Actually, it was yesterday, I believe, for HB 40, the fifth sub. We actually got another bill that's related to that that we just submitted, HB 560, HB 104, having to do with school safety, school meals. I was pretty encouraged seeing bills come through with regard to food and our students, which is really cool. We've got some nice, neat sports physical activity bills. And so you see the list there. One include one allowing kids to be excused for high school rodeo, which I think is pretty cool. So this is not an exhaustive list. There are many, many more. Your staff has been working tirelessly. There are just many names at this point, so I don't want to name call anyone, but really at this point, it's the whole agency. Across the board, what you just saw was safety, food, physical activity, and the like. With school buses, for example, transportation buildings, etc. They're always available, always helpful. I get emails. I have them into the night in some cases. So they've been very available and very helpful. Our LFA staff here, Ben, Rochelle, and Kiki, have been great as well. And then FinOps, our editors, specifically our editors, our staff in FinOps, again, always available, always helpful. It's been a really great session working with them. And then, yeah, I think this is, if you have any questions with regard to session, please reach out to, I'm sort of a chain of command fellow. Reach out to Sam, please. And that way it filters down to us, but please reach out to us if you have any questions. We're always available. Brett Baker, Dale Frost, myself, and Sam are here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
How many have we responded to so far?
We're at what, I don't know, Fins is at 3. It was at 349 last we looked, so it's
over 360
yeah.
fiscal notes so far.
Yeah, so
thank you. Yeah, we want to thank you for that, the work that you're doing. Just this morning, we're sitting in session and I think you got the fiscal note for the bill that was being discussed 5 minutes earlier. So,
yes.
So that's how quickly time flies around here.
Yes.
All right, we're going to go into our information. We have to excuse our Deputy Superintendent of Operations, Scott Jones. He woke up very ill this morning. So we'll turn the time over to Sam Urey, School Finance Director, and then whoever else you're having speak with you. Please, you can, I will just let you move forward.
Yes, Sam Urey, School Finance Director. We have here what we're calling fiscal impact bills of note. These bills are bills that may be affecting either tax policy or funding. So we're going to review these specific bills. Happy to answer questions as we go through that. And if there is time, as time allows, we're happy to address other bills that may have fiscal impacts.
Yes.
Can we also, like, when we look at the bills, would it be appropriate to tell us, like, never mind, because I see it says current status, and that's what I was going to ask. So way ahead of me.
Thank you.
Yeah, we tried to identify where they're at. The what's in the backup may be a little bit outdated, but it was as of when we prepared that. So we'll try and update you if there are changes to the status. But with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Minimum School Program Administrator Del Frost, especially with Senate Bill 37 that touches directly on the minimum school program. He's our foremost expert and probably one of two people in the state of Utah that understands this the best. So take it away, Dell. Are you on the Zoom? Do you want me to?
You just
Okay.
stick with that. I'll speak up. Please let me make sure you, tell me if you can't hear me online. All right, so I'm gonna be going over, I believe, the first three bills. All of these relate to education funding and property taxes in some way. Before I dive into them, I thought going over an LFA presentation that very briefly on some of the high-level principles of property tax equalization would be helpful. If that's okay, if you can go to that, Sam. The MSP property tax equalization, it was the second item in the backups.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to.
So Ben Leishman presented this, and I am shamelessly borrowing his stuff. No need to reinvent the wheel. He does a great job on especially explaining these difficult topics. So if you go right down here, so this first piece, there's some principles here that I wanted to go over. We're going to be focusing on you'll just hear some of these principles come out in these bills and these programs. So a balanced funding formula, you could argue has three different pieces. Horizontal equity means that you're going to treat similar students similarly, in terms of funding or equally. If you are a high school, if you're a ninth grader, if you're a high school student in San Juan versus a high school student in Park City versus a high school student in Tooele, horizontal equity would mean that you get the same funding. But then vertical equity means that we're treating differently situated students funded differently. So let's say that you, instead of location or some other factor, you have a special ed student and a non-special ed student. Clearly there's, mandated services according to their EIP to the special ed students. So the funding should be greater for the special ed student than the non-special ed student. So that's why you'll see vertical equity. That's what that means. And fiscal neutrality means that that there is at least very little, ideally no relationship between the relative wealth of the area and the educational resources available to the student. So now do we hit all these perfectly? Absolutely not. It's always a work in progress, but I wanted to go over that. So you'll see, especially on the fiscal neutrality side, we're talking about that with a few of these bills. Can you go down and talk? Let's see. Let's go to slide. Go to that slide number. Says, yeah, that one right there. Okay. So this first one here. So every school district is required, and this relates to Senate Bill 37, to levy what's called the basic levy rate. Districts don't choose what that rate is, and in order to participate in the minimum school program, they have to levy this rate. These three examples here are three different school districts with widely different property tax valuations. You'll see that District A has a taxable value of $5 million. The basic rate, if you see the 0.001600, that we usually talk about increments. That's 16 increments. The rate used to be that, it's actually 14 and change now. For District A, they levy that rate. They receive $8 million in local property tax revenue. For the basic school program, what we're saying is the value of all their WPUs, not just in K-12, but all of them, special education, CTE, and on down the list, is $40 million for all three of these districts. The state backfills the difference. So the state aid for District A is $32 million. District B with 3 times the valuation would raise 3 times the local property tax revenue. And so the state aid is still there, but at half the level, at $16 million. And then District C is kind of the Park City example here, where their property tax valuation is so high relative to the WPUs that their local property tax revenue from the basic levy alone, not the other rates, generates more than their WPUs. And there's actually what's called a recapture amount. They send back the difference in funding to the state, and that goes into the Uniform School Fund. Any questions on just the mechanics of the basic levy here?
Just a quick question. Is it just sorry, I'm driving, or I would have raised my hand, but this has nothing to do with the state guarantee. This is just state funding to fill the areas of the different mechanisms for the WPU. Am I right?
Chair, can I
Yeah,
answer that
let's
question?
just- yeah,
Okay,
please do.
I believe that was Vice Chair Earl, but I couldn't tell.
That was member Rio, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it was Earl.
Oh,
Sorry.
So Vice Chair Earl, yeah, so we're talking about the basic levy, and the basic levy applies to what's called the basic school program. There are 3 parts to the minimum school program. The basic school program includes all the WPU-based programs, the related to basic, all the categorical programs, and then the voted and board local levy program. We're going to get to that. So the voted and board local levy program, that's the guarantee program that you're talking about. And that relates more to the locally determined rates, the voted and board.
Okay.
rates.
Okay,
So-
I just want to make sure there was no overlap on that. Okay, thank you.
Yes, so in this case, we're not talking about the locally determined rates. We're talking about the state required rate called the basic levy rate. And that applies to this part of the minimum school program that has all the WPUs.
Okay.
So I have 2 short questions. Okay.
Yeah, good. Well, yeah, and then member
Member
Kelly has a
Okay, so my 2 short questions are, one, my understanding was, and maybe it's a different levy, and so it's sort of a simple yes or no. But so, I mean, this rate, there's the exact same amount that goes to every, or per student that goes to every school district. Is that right? It's
So,
not just semi-equalized, it's exactly equalized under this levy.
under the basic school program, and that has both those principles, horizontal and vertical equity. So not every student's funded the same, right? But every student in the same situation is treated exactly the same. And so yes, under the basic school program, a student, Park City receives exactly the same funding as San Juan.
Okay,
Does.
and I think we'll proceed to talk about levies that maybe are not exact, is that?
Correct.
Okay, and then my other question was, so is it from this amount of money? And maybe it's all levies, but is it from this amount of money that if a student attends a charter school, leaves Park City, attends a charter school, that a certain amount of money follows that student to his charter school?
No, this is not. And one of the things, if I was going to show, I was going to bring up the tax commission website so you can see all the different levies. There are essentially 5 that a school district can levy. So the basic levy is what we're talking about. There's the charter school local levy, and that's the one that follows the student with the charter school local replacement program. Those are the 2 state required levies.
Okay, where does the charter school levy come from? Which one of those levy?
It's called the charter school local levy. It's a separate levy, and it's based on both the property taxes of the, it's primarily based on the number of districts or students that attend charter schools that are residents within that district.
All right, that's enough for that. Thank you very much.
And technically it's 6. We're going to talk about 3 that they can set on their own. It's called the capital local levy. That goes to capital expenditures, the board local levy, and the voted local levy. All of these are levies that districts can choose to levy but the requirements, all of them have to go through truth and taxation to be able to do it. The voted local levy has to get approved by the voters for the first time that they levy a certain rate. The board doesn't. And then the only other levy of note is when you pass a bond to pay off that debt service. So the general obligation bond debt service levy. So this one we're talking about is called the basic levy, just one of those six. All right. Any other questions? Okay. This was the main thing that I wanted to go over before going to Senate Bill 37. So let's go back to that. Okay. So do you remember in that example that we just went, those three school districts received very different amounts from the state? You know, it was 32 million from the state, 16 million, and one actually cut a check to the state, right? So Senate Bill 37 changes how the basic levy revenues flow. Currently, those revenues, districts receive them, and then the basic school program allocations are reduced by that amount generated by that levy. What this bill does is now requires counties to remit those revenues directly to the state, and then that will be deposited into the general fund. And then so in this case, what comes from the Uniform School Fund, all three of those districts will receive $40 million from the state.
And the state. Leanne?
Yeah, go ahead.
The state, by the state, that seems to be important to me. It's remitted to the state treasurer, is it remitted to the Uniform School Fund, or is it remitted to the general fund?
And where it goes is very important in this bill. You're absolutely right, Board Member Lear. So it's remitted to the treasurer and what
The
the
state treasurer,
state treasurer. So county treasurer to the state treasurer. And then the board or the bill says that the state treasurer will notify USBE, you know, Alpine School District remitted, or Utah County on behalf of Alpine remitted $1 million in basic levy revenues this month. What we would do is provide $1 million in state funding from the Uniform School Fund under this bill. So rather than reducing Alpine School District state revenue by $1 million, that $1 million is going into the general fund, and we're funding out of the Uniform School Fund that $1 million. So what is the fiscal impact of this? I've been waiting, very interested to see what LFA actually says in their fiscal note, and they were pretty straightforward with it. They said that 842 million ongoing from property tax basic levy revenues for the basic school program. So this is essentially a Uniform School Fund savings now, will go to the general fund. And what this implies, it would have to be in one of the budget bills, is the appropriation for the funding that received that savings would have to go up. So you'll have $842 million of new revenue general fund, and we have 842 million in new costs to the Uniform School Fund. So what does this all mean? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
That does make sense to me because they're gonna generate one of the 842 million with the property tax. One of those two, right?
When you say they, the general fund?
The local taxes. So what I'm hearing you say, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's gonna need 842 million general fund. I heard you say their cost twice, 842 million cost twice. Is that right? Wouldn't it be just one cost because they're gonna use property taxes to pay for other things, presumably out of the general fund?
Right,
So they're gonna need to make it up somewhere
right,
from
right
the
now.
income tax fund, which means they'll reduce funding in other areas to education.
So what I would say is immediately, there may not be an immediate impact from this because the costs and the revenues are the same, right? So you have new general fund revenues that are coming in, but you also have new costs out of the Uniform School Fund. But over time, so there's new property tax, new construction going on all the time. That 842 will grow. Also, higher ed is funded through a mix of both income tax and general fund. So if you're getting revenues new revenues from general funds, you could essentially switch property taxes for sales taxes, and then that can be spent on other stuff. But that requires more growth on the income tax fund side for that capacity. Let's say there's $200 million of growth on the income tax fund side. It essentially gives capacity of $800 to $900 million over the next few years to switch, you know, what was a savings to income taxes is now a revenue for property taxes. And since it's not income taxes, it doesn't violate the constitutional earmark.
It's how they're dealing with the fiscal. They say they.
It is definitely a way to provide more access to revenues that can be spent outside of the constitutional earmark. Is that fair? I'm not trying to pick a side on this and those sort of things, but I think that's I do want to make sure it's clear that very unlikely, unless they do some major budget changes, would you see an immediate 842 million cut to education. Really what this is as property taxes, income taxes, sales taxes grow differently, this gives them flexibility to spend more broadly than they could have otherwise.
And it's only impact one of the 6 property tax.
Well, only the basic levy,
The
correct?
one that they require, as kind of like a carrot, if you tax this much, then you can get this much grant or whatever.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah.
And does the bill guarantee that release? What comes in goes out? Is there a guarantee?
The way it's written, it's exactly the money in and money out. So
Okay.
for example, the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget reached out to us and said, okay, let's take the example of Park City. You know, let's say they have $60 million of basic levy revenues and $30 million in WPU costs, right? So normally, they would collect all $60 million and then remit 30 to the state at the end of the year, right? That's the current system. Now, that 60 million would go to the state treasurer and it's pretty clear in the bill, there's that we need to provide the same amount out. So $60 million out. But at the same time, they only qualify for 30 million. So the way we interpret that is it's essentially like an overpayment to a program. So by the end of the year, they would be required to remit back that $30 million. It was Uniform School Fund out, it'd be Uniform School Fund in. So the net would be $30 million. It sounds like a lot of hoops we're jumping through to get this flexibility, and the answer is yes, it is. Does that, I don't know if that actually answered your question, Vice Chair.
It did, thank
Okay.
you.
So that is Senate Bill 37. It has already passed and is going to the governor. Any questions on that?
One more question. So one thing I'm hearing concerns about is, two parts. One, when you say remit to the state, I wish we could be a little more accurate, because remitting to the Uniform School Fund is still sort of remitting to the state.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's remitting it to the general fund, so I hope we can be a little more precise, because that's, it's going to the general fund where it's completely at the disposal of the legislature, right?
Correct. So yes, and to be more precise, it's remitted to the general fund of the state, and the new cost is from the Uniform School Fund from the state.
And then the second part of my question, yeah, and that's, I wanted to understand that. I've heard, this is the part I've heard questions about, if it's held, whatever period it's held, because it's such a gigantic amount of money, there's interest that's accrued. So who gets the interest? The general fund? Not the districts.
Right.
Who could have, in sending it directly to the Uniform School Fund, would have accrued the interest.
So if I can answer that
Yes,
question.
please.
So when this bill first came out, it didn't have the amendments about the timing and the explicit nature of the amount going in and out. And so, you know, when we did our first fiscal note, I made the assumption that we would be treating these revenues similar to we do the grades 1 through 12 funding. Essentially, we have this big pot of money and 1/12 of that goes out to the districts every month, right? Property taxes don't come in on an even 1/12 basis. 80% of them statewide come in November and December. And so when I calculated it initially to say, okay, if we're going to be receiving this according to the way districts receive it, and we're going to be paying it out over 1/12, what's the difference? For the first 4 months, there's actually a net benefit to the districts, but the last 8 months, there's a net cost to the districts. Overall, I anticipate it'd be about 1.4 million in lost in interest income to the districts, to the state. However, now what it says is, you know, there may be a little bit of a time lag with like 1 month and these sort of things, but basically, you know, you earn the same interest on your fund balance, whether it's coming from the state or whether it's coming from the county through property taxes. So now there's not really an income or an interest impact of the bill.
Right.
You know, so like the Park City example was important because if we only had to remit out $30 million, that's 30 million that they would not be earning interest on. But the way it's written, it looks pretty clear that they actually keep that 60 million. And then at the end of the year, just as they're doing now, they send the difference to the state.
And that's why it's important that they get to wait until the end of the year.
Right. And so that's why it's important that the same amount coming in is the same amount going out in as close to the period as possible. So, you know, what that means is very little will be coming from this pot, you know, essentially. So like, let's 80% of this will be coming out from the state in November and December, just as 80% of the revenues from property taxes will be going to the districts.
Thank you.
And there might be a 30-day lag. We just don't know how long this will take and all these kind of things. So around the margins, there might be very small impacts, but they're going to be relatively small on the interest income side. Now, in the current version of the bill.
So I've heard some people say, well, this now doesn't allow local districts to, you know, to have local control, but it doesn't sound like they had any control of these funds as it is, because this was a state mandated tax.
Yeah, I don't see that much credence in that argument just because, right, so property taxes are, in this case, these property taxes are unrestricted. Their state funds are unrestricted. The timing of it is the same. Districts don't get to choose the rate. So there's not really a loss of local control. The real concern that I think is valid is as these different funding sources grow, does this mean that we look back 10 years from now and there will be, you know, $800+ million that could have gone to public education? That's not.
Kind of the 1997 higher ed, like
It is very much like the 1996 constitutional amendment change in that respect.
Are there any questions online before we move to the next bill? Not seeing any, so let's move on. Thank you.
Great. So this one is a simpler bill. In explanation, I don't need to go back to the LFA presentation. That will be the next one here. So there was an effort in the legislature, you know, around 2017, 2018 to try to rebalance or bring local effort in the minimum school program up. Because that share, it used to be a lot higher if you go back to the 70s. And then, you know, over the next 30 years dropped significantly. So one of the things they did was they froze the basic rate. So one thing that's important about property taxes, and this is across all the rates, if you need to generate $800 million for the state and we get new construction, unless that amount increases, you know, that you're going to be generating, the rate will decrease, right? So freezing the rate will bring in new revenues to the state if valuations are going up. We know that from 2018 to 2023, property tax valuations skyrocketed. One of the things they added in addition to the basic rate freeze was what's called the weighted pupil unit value rate. So this is an additional small rate added to the basic levy. So it's all wrapped into that basic levy. So these are dollars that as the legislature increased the WPU value, if you didn't increase on the property tax side over time, income taxes would outpace property taxes. Does that make sense? And so what this WPU value rate was doing was it was adding a little bit to the property taxes, and those funds were then put into the Teacher and Student Success Program account, TSSA. So what this bill does is in 27, so not for this school year, but for the following school year, it eliminates the WPU value rate. So that would be a property tax savings. And then every year that provides new revenues to TSSA. So what this would provide is not a cut to TSSA, but it would stop the increase. And if it happened in 26, the amount would be about $32 million. It'll likely be slightly more than that in 27. So that's the bill. House Bill 110.
Any questions on that one?
Okay.
Seeing any
So then
questions?
that money would go also to the general fund.
No, this is a property tax savings.
Oh, they're just cutting.
Yeah.
The property tax because we have so much extra.
This would be a reduction in property taxes.
Very small savings to the average taxpayer.
Right.
Like $40 a month, 45 or something to the average taxpayer, but
No, not a month. It would be in the tens of dollars a year for your average. And yeah.
So inspired. So inspired.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's nothing.
You
You
could maybe take your kids to Swig. That's about it, you know.
There you go.
So it's
So-
not really, it's
3-inch subway.
it's just not an increase over time.
Well, so it is a cut of revenues. So if you have a program that's growing,
Mhm.
it is a cut in the sense that it's stopping the growth.
Okay,
But it's not a reduction, so, year over year budgets from 26 to 27. So these are the dollars that go to local community councils, and there's this whole complex, you can use X percentage for this and Y percentage for that. They won't see a reduction in their amounts, but they won't see that grow if this bill passes. It is. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so Senate Bill 321. So before I dive into this one, can we go back to the LFA presentation? And now we're going to talk about really three, but primarily two of those additional rates that are levied. So go down. It's going to be a bit down. Sorry, I closed my computer. Yeah, so keep going. So yeah, voting board local levy programs right here.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you remember, the high level structure, the minimum school program, WPUs are in the basic school program. The basic levy is the equalization factor on the property tax side for that. Voting board local levy programs is the third of, a three-legged stool. So this is the state property tax guarantee program. And you'll see that of the 1.3 billion, 77% is local funds. These are the majority, it's not all of the revenues that districts receive by levying their board rate and their voted rate. And then you'll see that there are three funding sources on the state side. I don't need to get into like the specifics of all those. They're all essentially the same in terms of practice for districts. Let's go down and talk about, I don't need to go to the minimum basic growth, local levy growth. I don't think there's a lot of, okay, so right here. So what is the state guarantee? So this kind of goes back to that fiscal neutrality idea, that depending on where you are in the state, you should receive equal funding if you have equal needs. If you're in an equal situation or a similar situation as a student. We know that, you levy one increment at at Park City, and that brings in $10 million. You levy one increment in Tintic, and that brings in $8,000. You know, and so the same property tax revenue generates vastly different amounts of funding. This is the main mechanism to try to equalize that, and it doesn't fully equalize it. But it does equalize it for 2/3 of district. So I'll go into that. So a couple key points here. So if you see down that second hollow bullet point says provides the guarantee for up to 20 increments. You'll see it says the voted levy, 16 increments maximum. And then the board levy is the balance of those increments up to 20. And so what the program basically does is every year USBE, depending on the amount appropriated to the program, and right now it's about $290 million. There's what is set, it's called a guarantee rate. So for fiscal 25, that's $64.05. What that means is for up to 20 increments, the state will guarantee $64.05 per WPU. So let's say you were a small district that had 1,000 WPUs, right? And you're levying up to 20 increments, right? That would be 20,000 times 64.05, whatever that is. That would be the revenue that you're entitled to under this program. Questions about the general idea of the program before I go into 321? Yes.
But when you say you're entitled to it based on local amount and the guarantee, is the guarantee.
Right. And so, yeah, if you look there, you're entitled to that amount. Now, Park City will always generate more than 64.05, so it will not get anything from the state. So if you look in this example to the right here, right? So in this case, I think it's $50 per increment. You're saying that, you know, let's say $37.50 was generated from your local revenues. The state would backfill the difference at $12.50 so that you're receiving $50 per increment, and then that's times all of your WPUs. So this is one of the more complicated formulas, and I haven't even gotten into the weird complicated part. But let's go down. Let me look and see if there's any more that I want to. I think there's a good example. Go ahead and go down again. Yeah, right here. Okay, so just one more example. So let's say it's $60 per increment, and a district isn't fully participating in the program. Let's say they have no board rate and they only have a voted rate of 10 increments, right? And they have 10,000 WPUs. So let's say they have 8,000 students, maybe another 1,000 WPUs for SPED, another 1,000 WPUs for all the other programs, 10,000 WPUs. So 60 times 10 times 10,000 is $6 million. That's their guaranteed revenue, but that's not guaranteed revenue from the state. That's state and local. And that's really important there. So let's say that those 10 increments generate $2 million, and they have $2 billion of taxable value, right? So what would be the state aid piece of that? $4 million. You know, let's say, for example, that they saw property tax value increase, and now it's $3 billion, right? So, but if everything else was the same, the state aid would go down from 4 to 3. Does that make sense? Because they're making now $3 million of that from the local side. So there are districts that receive nothing from this program. There are districts that receive quite a bit, and it's really dependent on the value of their property relative to their student base.
I think there is a.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Yeah.
But they do have to contribute some in order to benefit.
Right. So like in that example above, go back up. So remember how we're talking about 20 increments is what the state has decided to, so just for your own benefit, under the vote and local rate, the cap's 45 increment. So less than half of possible increments are guaranteed right now. let's say that they, over a 5-year period, but let's say nothing else changes, but over a 5-year period, that district raises their participation, let's say on the board side, another 10 increments, right? So now they are levying 20 increments, okay? So the difference changes that 60 times 10 times 10,000 now changed to 60 times 20 times 10,000. So they're guaranteed up to $12 million from the state, but they're also generating twice as much below. And let's say that there's no change to their assessed valuation. So in that case, they're entitled to 12, they are generating 4. So the state aid they're getting is $8 million. So by only levying 10 increments right now, they're leaving $4 million on the table.
Right.
Well,
Let me-
they- just,
that you're, so your constituents say, increase taxes or we don't get state funding.
sure,
So it's kind of what I feel like it's not a fair, truth in taxation, is it's not them coming and saying, we need these for these programs, and say, if you don't increase the tax locally, then we don't get as much money from the state, so it's almost a, yeah, well, I don't know, not even a match.
Well,
it,
in theory,
Yeah.
it's, if I can say, it creates some interesting and very difficult dynamics at the local level where it's kind of a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
You're getting the money from the state if you're willing to, as a property taxpayer, pay up to 20 increments. I'm going to be going down this next month to Wayne School District. They're the poster child for this. Right now, they're levying 18 increments. In 3 years, that goes down to 11, and then it goes down to 8. And they're going to be losing $500,000 unless they increase their participation. And that means that they are looking at a significant property tax increase or a significant cut. And so I'm going to be walking them through the same stuff so they know the trade-offs there, because it's pain one way or the other. It's pain on the property tax side or it's pain on the funding side. And it's the idea behind this program is if you are a local district willing to tax yourself, we're going to make it worth it for, if you're a Tintic school district, you levy 20 increments, it's almost not worth it. It hurts so much on the property tax side and brings in so little revenue. So that the state makes up the difference and basically guarantees up to about Ogden's level. And I can go to that in a
Can I
second.
make a
Yes.
quick comment here? So what this does from a theoretical standpoint is it aligns the stakeholders at the local level with the stakeholders at the state level. Because the idea is the local level, they know what they want or they need. It's local, it's a cue. It's not perfect though, because there's gonna be these misalignments that we run into.
But the state guarantee money that comes from the state is not legislator money, it's taxpayer money. The local funding, when you raise those taxes, it's not local money owned by it's taxpayer money. They're both taxpayer money.
Right.
So that's where there begins to be this interesting,
property is a lot more fixed income taxpayer.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
income
what
taxes.
And local boards have to deal with all of the grandmas and grandpas that come and
Yeah.
flood the boardrooms on Wednesday night. And man alive, it's from 16 years of listening to grandmas and grandpas already, even before this new deal, this is tough. This is really
Right.
tough, because if anybody's noticed, inflation and a couple of other little issues are getting tougher. So, how do we?
Wait. So the board are.
And I hope I'm not coming across as being flippant to property taxpayers, because I'm one of them. I look at my property tax bill, I know how much it's increased, but you're right, it's property or it's taxpayer money on either side. And so, there are a lot of policy arguments on, for example, if you had the same amount of money, guaranteeing only 10 increments, then districts wouldn't have to levy as much of as high of a rate, but you could guarantee more of that. But if you do the flip side and guarantee 30, so the 30 increments, right? You might have a lower, so do you see that line there? Let me actually go back to my point in just a second. So what this is the key graph to show what the voting board local levy program is doing. So you have to picture in your mind that this graph is being replicated 20 times. This is just one increment. It happens 20 times over. So one increment, Park City per WPU, Park City's generating almost 750 million or $750. Tintic is generating about $7. So Park City is generating essentially 100 times more for the same one increment, Tintic to Park City. Now, the $290 million that I'm talking about, that's all of that kind of orangish gray underneath that line. Green, that's all the local property taxes. So you can see this is why the majority of the program is the green local property tax. You can also see that as you raise that line, you know, the first, you know, when you raise the line from like $10 to $11, the only ones receiving that are like San Juan and Tintic. It doesn't cost very much from the state. But as you raise that, more and more districts are participating, right? And so that cost goes up and up. And so it makes it harder for that guarantee rate to go up because it costs more. It would be in the billions of dollars to get up to Park City level. And it would be well above $1 billion to get to South Summit or Rich levels. And so right now we're right around Ogden, as I was saying. Ogden, Morgan are kind of where we are. So going back to this example here, let's take Nebo, for example. You know, Nebo on there, where are they? They are, yep, right there, 6 from the bottom. On it, they're generating about $30 per WPU. So they're getting about half of the benefit that, you know, Ogden would at the same level, right? And both of them are getting stormed by the same people during truth and taxation. Nebo might say, hey, at $3, it's just not worth it. We're not going to do it. But at $60 to maintain that, it might be worth it, you know? And so that's the purpose of the program overall. It is to try to equalize property tax revenues. And right now we've essentially equalized those revenues with state revenues to backfill it up to about Morgan, Ogden levels. So this is the state guarantee program. And again, this only applies to 2 of those rates, the voted rate and the local levy rate. Questions before I go to Senate Bill 321.
Right?
This is where we're currently at, and so
where
now
we're
it's going to get changed. Yes, but
Question. Those that are above that line, so let's take Rich Henry, do they keep that or is that sent to the state?
nope, they keep all of that. So Park City, for example, it was really eye-opening. They generate more from these 2 rates than they get under the basic school program. So they generate more from their property taxes on the local level than their WPUs. And so that everything above that is not equalized. But they are local property taxpayers paying those amounts, you know? Yeah. So, and then from a fairness standpoint, the folks on the right hand have much higher rates generally than the folks on the left-hand side of the equation. Not across the board, but generally, because you don't have to charge as much to get more revenues in. They have higher rates, they make less money. Yep. So that's why this program exists. So, all right. So now let's go to public education funding amendments. Before I get to this, I'm sorry, and I know this is a lot, folks. I apologize. Let's go to that spreadsheet, the 321 spreadsheet, because there's one more key piece to this that wasn't really outlined in the presentation. You know, the spreadsheet, that's why I wanted you to have the Excel version. Because if you go to the PDF version,
this should be the.
you'll see it's all broken up.
Yeah, and
Okay.
It's important to know that we're one of the states that's never had equalization lawsuit because of what you just explained.
That is correct. You know, I came from Arizona. I worked in the education policy and finance world there. and this was only on the school capital side. But I could tell you stories about how difficult both for the locals and the state that is to try to meet a court case challenge.
They've gone for years.
And nobody's happy.
So even comfort with this, it's got a balance against that ongoing litigation.
Go to the rates tab, please, Sam. So the last thing I'll show you here. So do you remember how we were talking about, so just stay right there. Yeah, that's good. So right now in the formula, if you can, so right now in the formula, remember how we were talking about you receive up to 16 increments on the voted side and the remainder on the board side. So if you're levying 16 increments, you only need 4 increments. In addition to that, and this is where a lot of the weird stuff happens, there is a 6-year hold harmless window for your rate. So look at Alpine, for example. They raised their voted rate in 2020 to 16 increments. But because, and then they did it again in 2021, but then they didn't raise their rate. So the rate went down in 22, 23, and 24. So a big drop down in 22. That was one of, but then less so in 23 and 24. You can see that it says hold harmless 16 increments right there. They get credit for those 16 increments for up to 6 years. And so Alpine, what they're doing is we basically give them credit for 16 increments, but their contribution to the program is only the 1223. So they're getting 4 increments right now of free state money. I don't want to call it free, but it's the formula. It's money that they're getting that they are not participating on the property tax side to the same extent others are. Can I go to, I see a question from board member Earl.
The reason why the rate is 1,223 is because it's bringing in the same amount of money.
Correct. They have not raised their rate.
Valuations have gone up, so the rate has naturally dropped.
For valuations in 2024, even though it's
The 16 increments is reflective of the valuations in 2021 when they raised their rates back to 16 increments.
right, but we're gonna hold that, related to the current rate.
Related to their current voted rate, yes. Go down to Tooele. Tooele is another example, so you can see. So look at Tooele, for example, and let's forget 2024, why they went up to 18 increments. That's a whole nother story. And then just scroll to your left. Do you see how they almost every year, so from 2018, it was 16 increments, 16 increments, 16 increments, 16 increments. So Tooele was growing during that time, but they're going through truth and taxation every year. And so, you know, and right now they're actually levying more than that, 18 increments. So their hold harmless is the 1838. My point is Tooele is putting forth more effort, and forget the 1838 because 16 is the max on the voted side. Essentially, Tooele and Alpine are getting the same benefit from this program. Even though every year Tooele, so the one year they didn't do that was in 2023, when it went down from the 16 to the 13. Another example is Jordan. If you look at Jordan, most years Jordan keeps their voted rate at 16 increments. You know, one year they let it go down from 19 to 20. And so they're held at the 16 increments, but they're also paying the 16 increments.
Taxation every year so that as property values go up and the rate is forced down, they're pulling it back up to status quo.
And they're bringing in more revenue each of those times. You know, 16 increments as this goes up. If you keep the rate the same, that brings in more revenue.
Benefit from the raising property values because you're automatically forced down unless you do truth.
Unless you do truth and taxation, correct. So now let's go to Senate Bill 321. Can you go to that?
Yep.
All right, so this makes changes to the voting board local levy guarantee program. It does 2 things, really. It collapses the guaranteed increments. Remember how there's that were treating the voted and the board separately, the 4 and the 6 and all that kind of stuff. Now it's just 20 increments. It doesn't matter where it comes from, and you don't get a benefit if your one rate is lower than your one hold harmless rate. It also reduces the hold harmless rate provisions from 6 to 2 years, but it provides a graduated phase out of the hold harmless provision. So, you know, in the case of Alpine, for example, their voted hold harmless rate, and it's a little complicated because it's also collapsing with guaranteed increments, and we can go into that. But let's just use that example. Rather than getting credit for 16 and paying 12, they're getting credit for 12 and paying 12. You know, and they get that for 1 year rather than 5 years beyond the rate change.
Harmless working with the 2 year, it's just the 2 years prior, whatever's the highest will be maintained.
So it will, you get held at the increments from your current tax year and the previous tax year, and that's it.
Okay, those are the 2 years. then.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and because the statute actually says 1 year after the rates, that's why it's effectively a 2-year rate. And so what this essentially does is it reallocates money in this program to those like Tooele and Jordan that are providing, you know, they're going through truth and taxation more consistently. And those who, like, I'm going to call it play the hold harmless game, would no longer benefit from that. And I'm not blaming anybody. If I were a BA, I would set my 16 increments and then not touch it for 6 years. And I would send out, you know, and this is in a, like, you know, hypothetical world, but tell property taxpayers, hey, you're getting a benefit for these years. 2028's coming though. Get ready. Save your pennies. And, you know, from a tax policy standpoint, do you want to have this yo-yo effect? You want to reward that, or do you want to reward small, consistent increases in property taxes? What the formula is basically doing right now is rewarding that yo-yo effect. You know, it's a high tax increase and then nothing for 5 years and then a big tax increase to stay in the program. So what this reallocates right now is about $14 million from school districts. And, you know, so some of there's a whole nother piece of this that I didn't even really want to go into, but what districts have been doing, and they haven't been doing it intentionally, but you can move your property tax rates around. You have more capital expenditures. You can take some increments from your voted rate to your capital rate. But because this long hold harmless period, you could, you know, charge the 16 increments, get your full credit for that, and then move some of those increments to capital, get more money on the capital side, and then not lose anything on the voted side because the state's making up the difference. And we saw that with a number of districts. And Wayne is it Wayne? Yeah, Wayne is the poster child for this again. They wanted to participate in the small capital projects fund. And the only way to do it was to get their capital levy up to a certain level. And rather than doing that, all of the increases, they moved some of their voted rate to do that. They actually got a benefit from the state to do that. This is trying to get rid of that kind of odd loophole. It doesn't fully get rid of it, but it significantly reduces it.
So they went, whoever they were, right, which we don't know, but they went from 16, they moved it over to their capital, which meant it maintained the 16 here for the benefit. And then the 16, the 4 that was moved over to the capital, they're gaining additional.
Go back to the
But they could maintain this without having.
go back to the rates and show Wayne. So no, districts have done this, but I don't think it's been purposeful in that sense. Let me give you an example. Let's look at Weber and Wayne. Those are 2 good examples. So Wayne, their voted rate was 1380 in 2022. Can you highlight that? Okay, so almost 14 increments. So it went down naturally through the certified tax rate, but not by half. It would have been like 11 or 12. But they took 4 of those increments or something and went all the way down to 7 and put that in their capital rate. But they're getting credit for the 1380. And
what's that do to their?
When
they gather the rate on that, they gather the.
Correct. They get more from the state and they're keeping the same property tax. So this never was intentional from the legislature. And as I've talked to BAs, so Weaver did the same thing to a lesser degree. You can see they went from 1061 down to 766. That's a drop that's greater than their value. And because they also moved money into their capital. Now, they were just looking at, hey, we need some more capital expenditures. Let's put some property taxes over there. That's not a bad thing. They should be able to move where the need is, but they shouldn't get a benefit from state funding just for that. You know, if their property taxpayers are willing to and need to increase their increments to get more money from the state, that's very different than moving property tax rates around and not actually changing the effort.
And what you're saying is what they did was, they were able to.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that, I was just trying to understand.
Correct.
Out.
And 321
That.
right. The main reason why you're getting this bump is because the vote is treated separately from the board and you have these long hold harmless windows. That's why 321 addresses both of those things. So you can still move money to your capital, right? But at most you get a 1-year benefit from that, not a 5-year benefit. And you likely don't get any benefit because summing up both your voted and your, so scroll to the left over here so you can show. So these are the combined rates. So this is what it would look like. So it's just adding those two rates together. You can see in 2024, the majority of those, but Wayne is an outlier. They're all the way down to 8. But the majority of them are still above 20 increments. So take Tooele, they're the poster child of high rates. They're only getting guaranteed for less than half of their rates. It's only 20 increments right now. But Uinta, Wasatch, San Juan, scroll up to Alpine. So Alpine's at 23. So if Alpine moved, 3 increments over to their capital rate, nothing happens because it's just the 20 increments. So 20 is what is guaranteed right now. So as long as the only other thing I would show, last thing, and it sounds like I'm selling the bill, but I've been dealing with this program and running so many scenarios that it's more, I'm not trying to opine on, because there's a lot of tax policy and a lot of funding policy baked into this bill. Can you click the fiscal 25 current tab? So scroll to your left. This is the current formula. All of the white columns here are different calculations. You have to go through all the different increments and different things. Now go to the Senate Bill 321 tab. The actual calculations are just columns K through M. So it simplifies the calculation significantly. One of the problems with this is it's so complicated that very few BAs even know, hey, if I do this with my increments, what will happen? So simplifying it does have a benefit that hopefully more folks understand it. You can basically say, hey, do you think you're going to drop below your 20 increments with the certified tax rate? No. Okay. Then if you want to increase property taxes, you'll get a local benefit, but there's no state impact. It's a lot simpler for that discussion. So that's Senate Bill 321.
Did you have a chart that showed just kind of the positive and negatives of that?
Yes. So that excess funds hold harmless piece here. So can you zoom out just a little bit or just, yeah, you can show that. So the way the bill says is basically run the 25 numbers under the current formula, that's column C, run the numbers as if there was no hold harmless period. So everybody's just accountable to their current rates. If we did that overnight, Alpine would receive, rather than $52 million, $31 million. And a good portion of that is those 4 increments on the voted side that they're getting credit for. What it says is that is their hold harmless, and I hate using the same term in 2 different ways. I apologize, but the bill says hold harmless. So they have $21 million of capacity to basically keep them at the 25 levels. Click the Senate Bill 321 tab. Under the current formula, under the new formula, and this is why you'll see they don't drop down to 31 million, they go from 52 million down to 49 million. The reason being that you're able to raise that line with these changes. But what the state aid excess funds, you'll see 3,450,000, that will keep them at the fiscal 25 levels for 26. I was on the phone with budget folks from Alpine yesterday. They were trying to figure out how will this bill affect us. I told them there are a lot of things changing, but I would be really surprised if you're going to drop below your fiscal 25 levels under this bill for 27 and 28, because they only need $3.5 million. And go back to the excess funds, you'll see how as that phase down, they have 21 million in capacity, then 39 or 13.9, then 6.9. What that means is this hold harmless provision will probably keep them there. And Alpine's a weird case because Alpine School District will be 3 school districts in 28. That's a whole nother thing. But you know, hopefully that kind of gives you the idea. So go back to comparisons. Or
But you're saying it's not gonna impact things?
no, this is just the amount that they could be protected with to the 25 lows. So go comparisons over here, the comparisons tab. So this is the impacts over here. So C is their current funding levels.
Yeah,
Scroll up, please.
yeah, I'm trying, sorry.
C is their current funding levels. D would be their funding levels that I project under the current formula, 6-year hold harmless window, vote and border separate. So Alpine would get $5.6 million more. Under 321, they would be held at the 25 levels, so they would be at 52.5 million. So that's why it shows in K negative 5,689,000. That's not a cut. That would be that they would not receive an increase. Now take Jordan as the flip side of that. Scroll down, please. Jordan, you know, under the current formula would go from 8 million to 10 million. Under this new formula, they would go to 15 million. And that's because the biggest reason because of that is that we're able to increase the guarantee rate. You'll see the guarantee rates at the top, the 6405. You go to 67 under the current formula. With these changes, you go all the way up to 70 with no new money. And that's because you're no longer paying for this long hold harmless period. So that's why Jordan's funding would go up. So the long and short of this is this bill will, because the excess funds for the next 3 years will likely have minimal impacts on losing money. It might reduce the upside. It will redirect some new monies to those that haven't been benefiting from the current system as much. In 29 and beyond, the folks like Alpine will probably receive less than they have.
Unless they raise the rates like Jordan did.
But if they're already at the 20 increments, so raising their rates doesn't help them there. The one point I would make though is Alpine, that 6-year time frame still comes around, right? So that's a temporary thing. They'd have to raise their voted rate back to 16 increments anyways, and then lose that benefit. So you're kind of seeing them at the height of that benefit of that yo-yo. So you have to kind of think of this as a timing thing. It's not like it's a permanent loss. It's a loss of temporary or, a 3 or 4 year window when they get that benefit.
Why did Jordan get the benefit? Because they're not at the 20?
No, because they've been consistently increasing their rates back to the 16 increments every year. They've been going through truth and taxation more often.
But they can go up.
Well, as you saw, most districts are already levying more than 20. And they're only getting credit in the guarantee side for the 20 increment. Everything above that, they still get local revenues for, but they don't get guarantees for that. So like NEBO would get the $30 instead of the $60 for everything above the 20.
Right, and the point of the guarantee is just to create that equity. It's not to subsidize it, right? I mean,
Correct.
everybody, every time you raise your taxes, it's not a subsidy.
It's
just an equalizer.
it is an equalizer for about half of your total tax and capacity. And so, yeah, it's like, most districts, if you talk to them, they don't want to get near their 45 increments. Twill is close to that, and there are some reasons for that, and they're in a lot of pain right now. Most want to be well below that. But this is again, talking about, property tax equity up to a certain point. And it's up to the point that the state has funded. If they add money to the program, we can move that up. We can, or if they change the policy to guarantee additional increments, but right now it's at the 20.
And let me ask you one more question, that doesn't be a big tangent, but where does the equalization money come from? It doesn't come from the other districts, does it?
No, it comes from the state, from the Uniform School Fund.
Income tax.
Which is the state, but
It
that's
could-
not the general.
Correct. It comes, so be specific, it comes from the Uniform School Fund, income taxes into the income tax fund, which then gets transferred to the Uniform School Fund. Yeah, so it's income taxes backfilling the lack of property taxes for these property tax poor districts.
So, and I think that's because that means the taxpayers should not be, frustrated with or angry with the taxpayers in Wayne. It comes from a different fund.
Right.
That doesn't take away from it.
So unlike the basic school levy that we talked about where they actually have to pay that back, you're right. Park City is not paying from their property taxes. They are paying from their income tax. You know, as we all are to the state. Okay. I wasn't going to go too much into, and I know we're almost at time. I apologize, but those are important programs, especially for certain districts and their complicated formulas. House Bill 396, I'm not going to go into too much detail just for lack of time here. Happy to go over that with you all. I've been working heavily on this one too. This replaces the NEST formula, which right now is almost entirely school-based, but it's actually a whole collection of formulas with a two-part formula, one that's district-based to address district economies of scale, and then another that is school-based. This new formula would cost 16.3 million ongoing more. The district, this is their recommended response to a version of the bill from the previous session. And that's all that I'd get into. I'd love to get into more there, but we wanted to go over kind of big, maybe systemic changes for rural school districts. This is a very important bill for them. I can go into a lot of reasons.
396.
396.
Of note that 16.3 million was prioritized by the Public Education Appropriations Committee.
Yeah, and if they
for
want a really
funding.
good explanation of this, they could go listen to Public Ed Appropriations where you all presented.
And the presentation is in the backups as well.
And it was through the reallocations. Yeah. So that's all that I was going to cover. I'll turn it back to you, Sam. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.
Okay. I get these easier to here at the bottom. Senate Bill 137, substitute 1, course choice empowerment. Basically, this substitute, the original bill carved out both the home and private school portions of the statewide online education program. This substitute just carves out the private school portion of that and requires an independent program manager for those private school students taking SOEP courses. It basically will result in a transfer of funds from the current line item that goes directly, to the state board to what we call a contracted grants and initiatives line item. That current appropriation is a little over 8 million, but with the homeschool students costing about 1 million, it's approximately $7 million that would be transferred in that line item. Yeah.
Previously, there was a preclusion of using SOEP money and UFA money. So I didn't notice that in the new bill. So how are they going to track? Like if, let's say 20 students in this class that's getting the money back from ASU to do the SOEP class, have a UFA scholarship. What are they gonna do? Are they gonna take money out of the UFA scholarships to refund the SOEP fund? Otherwise, it's a big double dip, right? Because we're not allowed to
Right.
have students register in any public program with a UFA. So how are they gonna do that? Were there?
I think I'm not sure that there are specific provisions in the bill, but I presume that the process would be similar that we're using with students enrolled in a charter school or a
They would
public
just have to
school.
be considered a provider and take that of what they would get from SWP.
So UFA pays for it. Pays for that section.
I would have to verify. I don't know if Deputy Superintendent Inouye is here, but
That are UFA scholarships. Will they take a portion of the UFA scholarships to pay back the public fund for the SWP?
I'm sorry, guys, to interrupt, but you all just went out.
oh,
Yeah.
I just lost the sound when Leanne started talking.
I'll take that as a compliment. I'm a.
can you hear right now, Member Vargas?
I hear the laughing, yes. Is that her?
The bill, but that's really important. Yeah,
We're in the same.
I'm actually not speaking, so.
Same
I
problem.
just hear a lot of chatter in the background. I didn't know if people had microphones or not. Just trying to follow everyone's conversation.
You're saying we've spent hours and hours and hours and hours trying to clean up the mess between the dual enrollment, between the public school and the UFA. And now we're gonna be back in the same boat if they don't clarify in this bill how they're gonna delineate the monies for the UFA scholarships and the SOEP.
That's more unfair than the previous situation because these parents are getting $8,000 and they're getting the benefit of SOEP.
Well, I'm not even worried about fairness at this point. I just want it logistically to be accurate, so
I'm
we
worried
have
about fair.
transparency and that we don't have to spend all these hours again going back and separating it
So
out.
it's a double whammy.
But just do it right from the first time.
We'll double check on that and get back to you. I'm not 100% sure, so. And with our last 5 minutes, House Bill 219 from Representative Walter, charter school funding revisions. What this does is modifies criteria for charter schools that apply for the Charter School Credit Enhancement Program. And it allows a few more charter schools to take advantage of that program. It has some other changes to it, like expanding evaluation standards for charter schools applying for financing. And for these charter schools that are taking advantage of these, these charter schools are still generally in a pretty good financial position, not quite as good as those that already qualify for the Charter School Credit Enhancement Program. There's a small credit rating based maintenance fee that would be applied to these schools. It's allowing a few more charter schools to take advantage of lower interest rates and better terms on facility financings under the Charter School Credit Enhancement Program. There is a one-time appropriation of $4 million to the Charter School Finance Authority. And the fiscal note identified a cost of about $38,500 for personnel services to kind of oversee the grant application and approval process. Happy to answer any questions on that one. Okay. Seeing none.
That no charters have defaulted on these programs, so given that it's a loan and there have not been two defaults, I mean, I'm comfortable. If you'll let us know if it starts to be, because these are increasingly at-risk charters, that's a little bit of an overstatement. I don't want to see that default start.
Right. These would be charters that are just credit ratings right below what the current ratings are. So. All right.
Well, I just want
We can do more with less.
very much thank our finance department for taking the time in this very busy season. I did kind of got them at the last minute to do this. And so hopefully as board members, you found it valuable. Some of these texts, all the voted and board levies, it might take you 7 times to hear it before you finally understand what all the increments mean and how it affects us, but I wanted some deep dive into it, so I appreciate it. I will take one more motion.
Motion to adjourn.
There's a motion. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you.